truth out, man, it only gets you deep. And then they gag you, you don't get to speak. And when you get the leak, they try to hit the leak. The masters of the masses, they want this shit to street. That's why my middle finger's up to these sick elites. Playing on the regular. You keep the messenger. Free speech, it's the freedom of press. Take your deepest, darkest secrets, never leave from the set. If I'm a thief, then I'm a thief for the people you dread. The people want the red, why the blue you keep them in bed. See the sheep, keep them asleep, deceiving the weak. Keep seeking the leech till you cease, and I see your defeat. Until I'm deceased underneath, I freeze a red sheet, become a dead man. Then I hit the switch and release. And who is it? Goldman Sachs? And who is it? Goldman Sachs? Goldman Sachs is your creditor. Outside my window, a figure quickly creeps. They dark as night like some motherfucking chimney sweeps. Whiskey with my Mickey keeps, dying in my kidneys weak. Silence in my risky tweets, what the grand jury seeks. I'm wanting peace, like 7 years in Tibet. Now rest in peace.
Welcome to the 14th Unity for J online vigil for WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange. I'm Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. Julian Assange is a wanted man because he's published classified information that reveals crimes and corruption of very powerful people around the world, not just in the US. Those people want to stop him and get revenge. It's in the US, the supposed beacon of freedom and democracy and press freedom, that has indicted him and wants him extradited to the US for the crime of publishing. That's why Julian Assange has been a refugee in the Ecuadorian embassy in London since 2012. He knows that the second he steps back onto British territory, he'll be arrested and sent to the US, where he's unlikely to receive a fair trial and will likely spend the rest of his life in prison. We gather here every Friday to discuss the latest developments in WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. I'm joined by a great line of guests today, and I'm going to begin with the headlines from the past week. And the first headline comes from this morning when Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who's looking into the alleged Russiagate scandal, he unveiled an indictment this morning of former Trump advisor Roger Stone after FBI agents with CNN in tow arrested him at his Florida home. Mueller's office issued this statement, quote, "The indictment, which was unsealed upon arrest, contains 7 counts. 1 count of obstruction of an official proceeding, 5 counts of false statements, and 1 count of witness tampering." The indictment says, after the July 22nd, 2016 release of stolen DNC emails by Organization One, and Organization One in this indictment is WikiLeaks. In case you had any doubt, at one point in the indictment, it says that the leader of Organization One has been residing in the Ecuador embassy in London since 2012. It actually says that. But the reason they say it's Organization One because WikiLeaks is not being indicted here, so they don't want to name them. So after these emails were stolen and after they were released by Organization One, a senior Trump campaign official was directed to contact Stone about any additional releases and what other damaging information Organization One had regarding the Clinton campaign. Quote, Stone thereafter told the Trump campaign about potential future releases of damaging material by Organization One. Now, the indictment does not charge Stone or WikiLeaks with stealing the documents, nor does it charge Stone with colluding with WikiLeaks or Russia to steal the documents. Once again, we have an indictment from Mueller, which is getting all the requisite media attention here in the US, that speaks of no charge of collusion to commit a crime with either WikiLeaks or Russia. Of course, collusion itself is not a crime, although we get that impression if you watch the media here in the US. The indictment speaks of interactions only between Stone and WikiLeaks, as if this is a crime itself, but it isn't, and it's not among the charges. So in fact, what we're seeing is that Stone was, if this indictment is true, that Stone was tipped off in advance that these emails existed and would be released. And as far as I can tell, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been covering legal issues most of good part of my life as a reporter, and I don't see where being tipped off here is a crime. He did not take part in the stealing of the emails from the DNC or from campaign chairman John Podesta of the Hillary Clinton campaign. That was the crime here. The crime was the stealing of the documents. Nothing of that sort is said in this indictment, only interactions. So the crime was also lying about knowing in advance about these. So again, we see an indictment where the goods, the real heart of the matter, the core of Russiagate, the collusion, the stealing of the documents, and the supposed collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia to release on WikiLeaks these documents is nowhere to be found in this indictment. We see once again lying to authorities. That we've seen this through the Manafort. Well, he had other crimes too, but with Carter Page and with other people who've been indicted, the Michael Flynn, briefly the national security advisor of Trump, lying to authorities. That's the crime here. And apparently he tried to tell Randy Credico, who's named as person number 2. Randy Credico is a comedian and a political activist and a radio host. He's charged Stone is with tampering with this witness, Randy Credico, because he tried to persuade him, it says, to provide false testimony, essentially telling him, I think, not to make a big deal out of it, because Stone himself has admitted to this communication, but says that, quote, Stone was exaggerating he's admitted himself that he was exaggerating his role basically to get attention. We have a nice tweet from Aaron Mate, who's been one of the best journalists debunking the Russiagate story. And he says, quote, as I've said before, Stone had no actual link to WikiLeaks. He just trolled everyone into thinking that he did. He's now being indicted for lying to Congress, by the way, not to Mueller, about his efforts to find out what leaker WikiLeaks had from two people who also had no real link either. We have a statement that I want to read, very short one, from WikiLeaks, from Julian Assange's U.S. lawyer, Barry Pollock. It was posted by WikiLeaks today, just 3 hours ago, and it says, quote, the dawn military-style arrest of Mr. Stone, a 66-year-old political consultant, was wholly unnecessary and served no purpose other than intimidation. The charges against Mr. Stone do not allege that Mr. Stone lied about his lack of contacts with Julian Assange, but rather about his contacts with others and about documents reflecting those communications. The Office of Special Counsel has never spoken with Mr. Assange. That's the statement from Barry Pollock, the U.S. lawyer for Julian Assange. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that, I hope, on the show. And then the second story, and there's only two in my headlines today, is that WikiLeaks earlier in the week filed a petition for precautionary measures with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which is an autonomous body of the Organization of American States. And it asks that the court compel Ecuador to end the protocol that Assange is under right now, which denies him the right to speak about politics, and to end, quote, his isolation. And it also calls on the U.S. to release the details, unseal the indictment of Julian Assange, which we now know exists. The government has admitted this. Now, this case is still tied up in a courtroom here in Alexandria, Virginia. It was supposed to have been revealed in November. There was one hearing. The judge said, Leonie Brinkema, who's well known to anybody who's been involved in a national security case in the U.S., she said she gave a week to both parties to come back with motions. Those motions were filed, but no decision has been made. WikiLeaks here is asking that the Inter-American Court for Human Rights tell the U.S. to unseal that indictment. One of the arguments of the government in that first hearing was that the government rarely unseals an indictment until after arrest, which is what happened this morning with Stone, by the way. He was arrested, and then the indictment was unsealed and made public. The question here is whether the Inter-American Court of Human Rights actually has the legal right to make such a demand on the United States and Ecuador. My understanding from my reading of their own statute of incorporation is that they only can make a request to these governments to do that their decisions are not legally binding. Some confusion arose when the AFP, French press agency, reported the other day that it was legally binding. But in fact, the court itself says that it can only make a request, and that the obligations on states are only to cooperate, not to implement decisions of the court. I linked in the story that I wrote on Consortium News to an academic paper that says the power of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is exclusively political and its decisions are not binding. So in that sense, it would be an important victory if WikiLeaks lawyers can win and get this precautionary measure decision by this court, because it will put political pressure on the U.S. and Ecuador, and it's an embarrassment for them to be called out like this for violating Julian Assange's human rights. It's very much like a General Assembly resolution, which has no legal binding on the parties, but is quite damaging to the reputation politically of the party that's being drawn out. I just point out a couple of examples. When Israel has lost General Assembly votes, they fight very, very hard to stop that. even though there's no legal binding on them to do anything that this General Assembly resolution says. They do that to avoid the kind of damaging PR that this kind of a decision makes. Only the Security Council of the UN really has legally binding and enforcement powers. That's another issue. The OAS has no enforcement powers. So even if it were legally binding, I doubt that the OAS can force the hand of this judge, Leone Brinkma, here in this court in North Alexandria, unseal an indictment. Now, there's no way a U.S. judge in a federal court is going to listen to the OAS to force her to make a decision. So those are the two big issues that I think we should discuss. And I want to introduce our first guest. And I'm really happy to have him back on the show, and that is Ian Schilling. Now, Ian is an extraordinary person to have on. Ian, unmute your microphone, first of all. Yes, he has just done that, even before I said it. Thank you. Ian is a robot. You could see that his lips are not really moving. Well, he's laughing, but he's programmed to laugh. He is not a human being. Well, anyway, that is according to Sky News and the British government. Sky News, the British government said that some time ago now, that there were a number of bots. We all know about this now, but this was quite early in this fiasco, that there are a number of bots out there that were directed by Russia that were denigrating the Russiagate story and spreading Russian disinformation, blah, blah, blah. Basically, anybody who criticizes legitimately U.S. foreign policy is smeared as a Russian bot, because that's the way to try to protect the people who are running those foreign policies and don't want that kind of interest. And the sycophantic media goes right along with it. And there's no better example of that than this Sky News interview that they did with Ian. They're saying he's a robot. Then they have a live human being on there telling the world, I'm not a robot. Kitty, if you have that tape set up, I really would like our audience to watch this 7-minute extraordinary interview. On those,
I'm
by the way,
speaking
on
now
the
with Tony Kevins, former Australian senior diplomat and an independent commentator now on foreign affairs.
Where you'll be able to watch it.
Welcome, Ambassador Tony Kevin, to
so that we don't get feedback, but I'd like you to see it if you want to.
Vigil.
So, Kitty, if you give a few minutes
from
Sydney,
Canberra.
go to where you news from to watch this.
From Canberra, Australia.
You're in Canberra, capital. Okay. So thanks again for joining us. So you are one of the few former or current government officials anywhere.
You have it set up, Kitty.
My question is, when did you post it?
I'm still waiting to hear from
It
Kitty.
was
So,
shortly after the Bradley
Ian,
terrible
tell me before we show the
massacre.
interview. Now you could, Ian, just
from
Ian,
there.
unmute your mic, please. Before, is it playing? Do you see it playing? No.
No.
Okay, Ian, let's talk a little bit about this. You said before, well, tell us how you were contacted by Sky News and this negotiation you had with their producers about this interview before we show it.
Okay, so I'd just been banned from Twitter because Atlantic Council and their soft puppets had reported me for nothing. And then I got unbanned, and then in the evening, got The Guardian and 2 other media outlets in the UK published a story that was directly out of the Atlantic Council through the UK government spokesman that accused me and Partisan Girl of being Russian bots. Okay, and it's obvious that neither of us are Russian bots because Partisan Girl has got a huge YouTube video library and she talks about Syria all the time. And she's got a blue check mark. So her ID has been verified by Twitter. And I've got a blog going back until the end of 2011, talking about all the neocon wars and the corruption in the US government and whatever.
By Russia that were. Are you there, Ian?
Yeah.
Okay, please carry on.
So I mean, Ben Nimmo, who is triggering all this, is the leader, the team leader of DFR Lab that is part of the Atlantic Council. And he calls himself an analyst. And he can't even work out. It's obvious to anybody with a brain in their head after looking at my Twitter account for 20 minutes or looking at my blog that I'm not a bot. It's obvious. He calls me a bot. I mean, he must be. I mean, they obviously can only hire idiots to work on these things because no one else will agree to do it. They must be complete idiots. They're incompetent. But I then get contacted by Sky News and saying, we'd like to have you on for an interview and to put your side of the case. So then, after a little while, I agreed to talk to them on Skype to go over the interview rules, okay? And I knew I was walking into the lion's den. I mean, this is Murdoch's outfit, right? This is neocon central with Sky News, isn't it? Right? So I spent an hour, nearly an hour, talking to Alistair Bunkle, their so-called defence correspondent, about the interview rules. And I said, well, I'm not going to do it unless it's live. Otherwise, you're going to edit it. And cut me off. If I, are you going to try and make me look like an idiot with selected, 10-second clips or whatever? I mean, they'd already done a hatchet job on Craig Murray when he went on TV, and he didn't do it live, you see, and then they edited it after. So I wasn't going to do it unless it was live. And I also said I need at least 5 minutes to put my case, because you're going to put all this stuff my way, and I need time to answer that. So I need at least 5 minutes. It's got to be live. And after about 45 minutes or 50 minutes, they agreed to that. And then I went on later in the afternoon. So if you just spent nearly an hour doing a detailed negotiation, and it was quite a hard negotiation to put the ground rules out, because they didn't want to agree to this stuff. How can you spend 50 minutes negotiating with somebody about the ground rules for an interview and then get called a Russian bot as their first line on the bloody interview? It's crazy. I mean, what are these people got in their heads? You spend 50 minutes talking to someone. You're a bot. That's like me telling you, well, I don't agree with what you're saying. You must be a bot, Joe. You're a bot, aren't you? You're a piece of software. You're a software algorithm. You're not real.
Amazing. Sometimes I feel like a bot, actually, but I just was informed that when we played the interview that there was music playing over it. So I'd like to have Kitty, who is producing the show today, to once again play the interview of Sky News that Ian's just been talking about, so that the audience can hear that interview. Is that possible, Kitty? Okay. So what we're going to need a couple more minutes to set it up. So Ian, let me ask you about this indictment today before we show your interview with Sky News. The indictment of Roger Stone. What's your take on? What's your reaction to this?
Totally ridiculous. It's another storm in a teacup, nothing burger that doesn't mean anything. All right. So Stone gave evidence to a congressional inquiry, didn't he? So yeah. Mueller has picked up on 5 misstatements that Stone has made. It's supposed to be 5 misstatements, right? So nobody can remember, parrot what they did 2 years before he gave evidence or whatever. So I don't, they won't say what he's supposed to have lied about, right? But I mean, if it's anything like the other ones, I got the date wrong by a week, or so something stupid, something trivial. It doesn't make any difference to it, whatever. But there's no link to WikiLeaks. There's no links to Russia. I mean, if they had any collusion, with WikiLeaks or collusion with Russia or contacts with Russia, they would have put it in the indictment, and they've got nothing. Absolutely nothing. They've just blown it all out of proportion. And of course, CNN are all going to blow it up and wall-to-wall coverage 24/7. And then, raiding his house at 5 a.m. I mean, that's just crazy, isn't it? That's just stage-managed theatrics for the cameras. That is stage-managed theatrics for the Rachel Maddow show and CNN's, garbage propaganda show, isn't it? They could have walked up to his house, knocked on the door at 11 o'clock in the morning and said, we need to ask you a few questions. Can you come along with us? And, they would have needed 2 FBI agents unarmed, wouldn't they? Knock on the door, and Roger Stone would say, all right, well, if I have to, I'll come along with you for an hour and I'll answer some questions. Right? That's what he would have done. But they had a SWAT team, basically, didn't they? With armed, they had about half a dozen FBI, and they just happened to have a CNN cameraman who was just hanging around Roger Stone's house at 5 o'clock in the morning because... Well,
he wasn't hanging around. He was invited there by the FBI.
Of course they were.
CNN, a CNN crew there, and that means this was reality TV, basically.
Yeah, it's reality TV. It's one of these cop shows, isn't it? Real cop shows that they have on TV where go in and bust the door down of a drugs dealer or something, don't they?
You know, the CNN report that the flash that came out this morning said that CNN was there and the FBI banged on his door and said, "Open the door." And then the next line was, "Stone opened the door." Great. Well, I swear to you, you could read it. That's what it says.
Yeah, he didn't try and run out the back door and get in his car and drive away at 90 miles an hour, did he? He just said, "Oh, what the hell's going on?" Oh, all right, I'll come along then.
Okay, Ian, we got your interview with Sky News set up. It's really it fits right into the Stone story because it's part of this delusion that's been surrounding Russiagate since the beginning, where there are human beings who are said to be bots who take their orders directly from the Kremlin, and now we've got this Stone indictment. So let's play, Kitty, if you're ready. Let's play that 7-minute video clip of Ian Schilling here, our guest today, being interviewed by Sky News.
Government start to do that a lot more.
Again, it could be seen on Consortium News for our panelists.
Two Twitter accounts specifically that they claim have been pushing a Russian narrative and spreading lies. One of them...
Are we ready to roll, Kitty?
And we have him now live. He's called Ian.
Yeah, let's bring in Ian now. Thanks very much indeed for joining us today, Ian. So you've been identified by the...
Ian, were you, during that Sky interview, while we're waiting, were you sitting where you are right now with the same foggy lens that you...
Well, I was on this computer, but I wasn't in the same room when I did my stuff.
Identified you and singled you in particular.
I thought that your performance was so extraordinary because a lot of people get nervous when they're on a international broadcast.
You should have seen my stomach in the morning when the Guardian story came out and the Sky News wanted to interview me. I've never been on TV before. I've never done an interview. The old butterflies were going like crazy. Why the hell am I...
Hey everyone, it's all going pear-shaped again.
So that lots of people can see. I mean, the government's lies are very transparent and very easy to see. And anybody who applies...
Yeah, so we've got the film playing over the top of the live up in the left-hand corner. So be careful what you say, because you are still partially on air. I don't know what's going on.
And he started off the conversation.
Can you hear the video?
Possible motive was have to carry out a chemical weapons attack when it was guaranteed that was
okay. All right, let's go to if we're still live, Ray, unmute your mic, please. Ray McGovern. Ray, well, we're trying to get that interview up, but while we're doing that, I wanted to ask you about your reaction to the Stone indictment. He wasn't hanging around. He was invited there by the FBI.
Of course they were.
A CNN crew there, and that means this was reality TV, basically. Yeah. Mute your mic, whoever's mic is. Is that you, Ray? Are you mute? Mute the video. There you go, Ray. Can you hear me, Ray?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, now you've muted the feedback from the broadcast. So let's talk now about your reaction to the Stone indictment this morning, please.
Well, hang on. He's not yet on air.
Okay.
Now you're back. Yes.
Okay, Ray McGovern is joining us now from Northern Virginia, and he is, of course, a former CIA analyst and a frequent guest here on our Vigil. And I'm really interested to hear what he has to say about the Stone indictment, his insights.
Well, I'm most interested in seeing Ian's 7 minutes on Sky News. And also, I would point out that, these pre-interview interviews are very characteristic of Sky News or BBC or Al Jazeera or even Democracy Now! When I'm invited to speak at one of these august places, somebody wants to know what I'm going to say. And I'm finished doing that. The only network that does not ask me for a pre-interview to see what I'm going to say is RT. They have never asked me for a pre-interview interview. So it's quite ironic that they get a bad rap for being a Russian mouthpiece when the rest of the people will ask for this interview. Now, what I was interested in here in the Stone indictment is the fact that they're talking post-July 22. Now, Julian Assange announced that he had emails pertaining to Hillary Clinton on the 12th of June, 2016, all right? So it was 6 weeks or so before the Democratic National Convention, which was began on the 25th of July. So we're talking after the first issuance of these WikiLeaks documents. Now, what did these emails from the DNC, what did they say? Well, they said that Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders, pure and simple. What did the New York Times, Washington Post say? Why did the Russians steal those emails? Those Russians stole those emails. They're trying to get Hillary Clinton defeated. Now, that was a very, 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 very artful, what shall we say, distraction. It was a magnificent distraction from the substance of the emails. And it worked like a charm. All the media proceeded like lemmings in line, saying, why did the Russians do this? Why did the Russians do this? Why did the Russians do this? Now, what's really at stake here is that even Oliver, what's his name? Not Oliver, but Stone. What's his first name?
Roger. Roger Stone.
Even he doesn't pretend that he had anything, or at least the indictment doesn't suggest that he has anything before the 22nd when those emails were released. So my question would be, well, wouldn't everybody and his brother be interested in finding out what else Julian Assange had? I mean, everybody, his brother and sister and his cousins, and so were his cousins and his sisters and his aunts and his cousins and his sisters and his aunts, okay? Well, big deal. So I think Ian is exactly right. They're really scraping. And what they're not prepared for, if we can make this an impact in the media, is that we can prove that there were no hacks of those DNC emails. And we can prove that for 3 reasons. First off, NSA, by its own admission, collects everything. If there were a hack over the internet, NSA would have it. Looks like they don't have anything. Secondly, Guccifer 2.0, it's a fraud from the get-go, and we can prove it from forensics. Thirdly, we've been saying for over a year that it was a leak, not a hack. In other words, a leak with a thumb drive with direct access into the DNC computers or server, not a hack over the internet. We have physics on our side there, the principle of fluid dynamics. In other words, you have a pipe, okay? The internet is a pipe. It has a certain capacity. It can't run at 3 times the capacity, but 3 times the internet capacity happens to be exactly what a thumb drive can copy off a computer or a server. So that's number 2. Number 3, which just recently came to light, there's a technical port of the metadata that has now been indicated to show that it was used with these DNC copies. These technical features have to do with copy onto an external storage device exclusively. They're not used with a hack. Now we're looking at that data. As you can probably tell, I'm not a Bill Binney, former technical director of the NSA, always says, yeah, Ray, you're a history major, but you're teachable. Okay, well, I'm teachable, but we'll have to wait till Bill and his colleagues from NSA in our group, Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. We have 2 technical directors, Bill and Ed Loomis, and we have other people that know the technical end of this. We will be publishing on that. Now, it'll be conclusive for everybody who's willing to learn, but it's all too easy. It's all too easy for history majors to say, oh, I can't understand that. That's too technical. All they have to do is go on Google and plug in fluid dynamics. That's number one. And then they look at the other metadata that's associated with copies onto a external storage device and see how the coding or the features that were used were those that are exclusively used for copying, not for hacking. Now, the question, our challenge is always to make this presentable so that anybody who's genuinely interested can understand it. Now, if I can understand it, most people can understand it, but they have to be interested enough. And I dare say that most people for the last 2 years have been so unwilling to believe anything that Trump says, and so infected by what I call the HWHW virus, which stands for Hillary would have won. Okay. Now, she didn't win. It couldn't be that nobody trusted her, or that she compromised top secret documents, or that she didn't campaign in the right state. That couldn't be it. It had to be something else. Hillary would have won except for Russia. Okay. So what we're out to prove is that however much people want to demonize Putin, there is no evidence that has been adduced. And I had a chance exactly 2 years ago to confront who is now Adam Schiff. He's now head of the House Intelligence Committee. And I said, Congressman Schiff, and this is all on tape, I said, you know, just a couple of weeks ago, the President of the United States, Barack Obama at the time, 2 days before he left office, he said, and I quote, "The conclusions of the intelligence community with respect to how Julian Assange got the DNC emails are inconclusive." End quote. So you have intelligence community conclusions that the President of the United States says is inconclusive. I had a chance to ask the director of national intelligence at the time. His name is James Clapper. I said, well, how do you understand? You briefed Obama up and down on the 5th of January. How do you account for the fact that on the 18th of January, the president says these conclusions are inconclusive? If you can't prove, if you can't figure out or document how WikiLeaks got these emails, you got nothing. And that's what they've got. That's why they're, that's why they're indicting all these ham sandwiches, including including a friend today. And, it just gets a little tedious. But the main problem is that people don't want to believe, they don't want to believe that they've been brainwashed. And that's an accurate word for what the major media has done to most of my friends, actually my neighbors. I talk to them and they look at me as though I have two heads, Why am I supporting Trump? I don't support Trump. I think he's the worst president the United States ever had. But if you're going to get rid of him, there are 18 reasons better than a trumped up, pardon the expression, a trumped up rationale saying he's connected with the Russians.
Well, Ray, thank you. And speaking of brainwashing, we're going to look at Sky News's efforts in that regard. I think, and I apologize to our audience for the technical problems we've had. I think now it's all ready to set up to play with the full video. Is that correct? Can you please play the tape of Sky News interviewing Ian Schilling, who's standing by here with us? And again, mute your mics if you want, Ray and Ian, if you want to watch it on Consortium News or on Unity4J, which is streaming it. So are we ready to roll, please?
That they claim have been pushing a Russian narrative and spreading lies. One of them I've contacted, and we have him now live. He's called Ian.
Yeah, let's bring in Ian now. Thanks very much indeed for joining us today, Ian. So you've been identified by the government in this research as being a Russian bot, are you?
That is a 100% total lie and complete fabrication by the UK government.
Why do you think they've identified you and singled you in particular out then, Ian?
They are singling out for attack anyone who calls out the UK government lies on what has been happening recently. They have attacked me specifically because my Twitter account has recently got quite a lot of traction and a lot of impressions, views on it, so that lots of people can see. I mean, the government's lies are very transparent and very easy to see. And anybody who applies a smattering of critical thinking will immediately call out numerous lies, and the government position just completely collapses. Well, you had Major General Jonathan Swan on recently on Sky News, and he started off the conversation with what possible motive would Assad have to carry out a chemical weapons attack when it was guaranteed that that would bring the wrath of the whole world down on him and give the UK and US governments the pretext to bomb. He wouldn't do it. He is not the stupidest man in the world. He's survived 7 years of brutal war against terrorists.
Well, if not, who then?
The jihadi terrorists, the Wahhabi Salafists, Jaish al-Islam, who controlled that area, staged the attack. What actually happened in Duma in the attack is that Assad bombed the area as part of his fight to clear out the last of the terrorists. Assad had already recaptured 95% of Ghouta, which was this terrorist stronghold just outside Damascus.
I just want to bring in our defence correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who's with me as well, Ian, to talk to you on this point.
Ian, two questions. One of that is, and this is what the British government, one of the reasons they've highlighted your account, is that the argument is that you have consistently and prolifically taken an anti-British standpoint.
No, I've taken pro-British lie. That is completely false. What do you mean by Britain?
And you accuse the British government of mistruths.
No.
But they point out that in 2012 you tweeted this. I think we can see a tweet that you put up in 2012 that says that you were voting for Ron Paul. Okay, well, so you say you're going to vote for. I voted for Ron Paul, you said, and then a year later, in 2013, you tweeted this, which says you are now starting to think about moving to America. Okay, I will shortly be moving to America, which meant that in 2012 you could not have voted for Ron Paul. So they question your authenticity when tweeting.
You're trying to cut me off. You're trying to prevent me from speaking, aren't you?
No, far away. I was just putting that point to you, but please answer it.
Okay. In 2012, I campaigned online for Ron Paul during the primaries. Vigorously. I've got loads of tweets.
But you said you were voting for him, and the British government say that you were therefore telling lies in 2012. So why should your account be believed now?
And instead of saying I supported Ron Paul in 2012, I said I voted for him. Now, I don't know. I can't remember when I did that one tweet out of the 150,000 that I've done.
Let's just get back to the point about today, though, and the accusations today, Ian. You are denying that you're a Russian bot. You're saying you have absolutely no links with the Kremlin. So the material that you retweet, the government's identified 100 posts a day from your account, 1,300 posts in 12 days. How do you check the veracity of the information that you retweet, the people that you're retweeting? Do you know them? Do you have Kremlin contacts?
I have no Kremlin contacts whatsoever. I do not know any Russians. I have no contact with the Russian government or anything to do with them. I've got no contact with spies. I am an ordinary British citizen who happens to do research on what is going on in the current neocon wars, which are being fought in Syria at this very moment. I I check out what is happening by credible journalists. Now, there aren't any of those on Sky News. And there aren't any others in the whole of the Western media. The only people that are reporting with a voice of reason or sanity or honesty are Peter Hitchens, who's questioned why the hell would Assad use chemical weapons when he's winning, and Tucker Carlson in the US, who said the same thing. And
okay, Ian, we are running out of time. I just want
Ian,
to
can I quickly ask you, firstly, I would say, you know, we bring you on to give your view to make it balanced, but do you ever worry that inadvertently you might be part of a Kremlin propaganda machine? Inadvertently?
No. The question is, what does it mean by being pro-Britain or pro-American? Does it mean being pro the interests of 60 million British people? Or does it mean the clique in the UK government, the cabinet, that are doing things for their own personal benefit and their cronies? In the arms companies, BAE Systems. Theresa May's husband runs a large hedge fund or private equity fund, which is the largest shareholder of BAE Systems. Do you think BAE Systems went up because Theresa May started bombing Syria? Yes, they did. She's got a conflict of interest. That's one. So I am speaking for the vast majority of British people. 59.9 million out of 60 million English people or Scots. I'm not speaking for the UK government, who do not work for the British people. And they plainly ignore the wishes of the British people, because hardly anyone in Britain wants Theresa May to bomb Syria. It's less than 25% want Theresa May to start a war with Assad.
Ian, I'm afraid we have run out of time. Thank you very much indeed for coming on and putting your side of that across. Ian, there talking to us via Skype. Thank you. We're going to return now to the news that Arsenal manager Arsene Wenger will stand down at the end of this season. Let's speak now to the Daily Mail's chief football writer,
not a human being, moving, clearly flesh and blood. And they asked him if he was a Russian bot. I mean, you didn't have to see any more of that, actually. So we're joined also by Craig Murray now, a former UK ambassador to Uzbekistan, and someone who's also been a critic of the Russiagate story, and by John Kiriakou, former CIA agent who was jailed for revealing illegal torture by his agency. And I want to bring in Craig first, if I can. Have you had a chance to look at the indictment of Roger Stone? Because we're talking about that and the WikiLeaks petition to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. But let's start with the Stone indictment. Have you seen it, and what do you make of it, Craig?
I've not seen the indictment itself. I've seen media accounts of it, and quite interesting. I mean, as far as I can tell, in terms of misleading and lying, he's done that in terms of promoting and boosting his role. And he wasn't in contact with WikiLeaks. He was a fantasist who was trying to maybe find a way to make some money out of pretending to be in contact with WikiLeaks and desperately asking other people if they could get in touch with WikiLeaks so he could find a way to open a channel and find a way to exploit that to make cash. And in terms again of witness tampering, as far as I can tell, that's going to relate to his threats to Randy Credico not to expose him as being a fake who didn't really have a channel to WikiLeaks. So the amazing thing is the mainstream media are reporting the story as being the precise opposite of what the story actually is.
Well, that's exactly right. He was trying to tell Credico to just clam up that I went overboard and don't talk about it. And they have twisted this. And you have to imagine that the investigators of Mueller know what you just said. They have to see it that way, unless they're completely deluded. And if they're not deluded, then this is an act of subterfuge. It's an act of deception. It's almost, it's a political document, again, not really a legal document. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I think they do know everything we've just said. We're aware of that, and actually, I think in charging him or indicting him, I think those are what lay behind it. They're going to accuse him of saying lots of false things that boost his role, as opposed to hiding contact with WikiLeaks, because he didn't have any contact with WikiLeaks. But they're happy to give the misleading impression that that's the opposite of what's happening in confidence, if you like. So without actually saying any outright lies, they're deliberately misleading the public. And of course, the mainstream media are extremely happy to go with that, because I'm quite sure an awful lot of the mainstream media are aware of this too, just as we are.
But unlike the indictments of the GRU agents, which will never see the inside of a courtroom, because those agents will never be arrested and extradited to the U.S., therefore, Mueller was able to say whatever he wants to because he knows that his indictment won't be tested. But this case is of an American citizen, and he can show up, and probably will, in a courtroom somewhere, and his lawyers could then challenge this. So don't we have a different situation here where they've gone out on more of a limb, Mueller's team?
I'm not obviously an expert in the system in the United States, but my expectation is that the feeling is that they can get enough out of this to do enough political damage and to give the Clinton camp enough political ammunition to use before it ever gets to court. And one day, because the judicial process is a lot slower than the political process, one day when it all comes out in court, this is rubbish. By then, the damage will have been done, and whatever political action they're seeking to initiate will have been taken before then. That's my reading of it.
And it will be on page 18B rather than the court proceedings, rather than page 1 as it is today, right? The indictment.
Precisely.
So let me bring
in a lot of terrorist cases. There's been a tremendous amount of high-profile, particularly certainly in the UK, and I think it's also true in the United States. We've had no end of cases of very high-profile page 1 arrests of people on conspiracy to commit terrorist charges, Muslim people particularly, and then on page 1 when they're arrested, and then when they're found guilty 2 years later, found not guilty 2 years later, that's on page 24 if you're lucky.
Exactly. And, once again, another indictment is nothing about collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia or with WikiLeaks. That's not in this indictment. And what he was lying about, as you pointed out, was not about some kind of collusion with Russia. I want to bring in John Kiriakou now. John, I hope you had a chance to look at the indictment or at least read about it, and I want to love your take.
Yeah, read the whole indictment. I was absolutely fascinated by it. The takeaway for me is this. It's that Roger Stone is a fabulist. Roger Stone is a pathological liar. And Roger Stone is just not happy unless he's the center of attention. And he wasn't the center of attention in this scandal. And so he inserted himself in it. He lied at several different stages to the wrong people, as it turned out, and now found himself with 7 felony indictments. I actually know Roger relatively well. And I can tell you that he's been worried about this since the summertime. His exchanges with Randy Credico were filthy for a reason, not just because that's the kind of guy Roger is, although that's the kind of guy Roger is. But it was also because he was petrified at the notion that he might go to prison. He realized last August that he was in over his head, but by then it was too late for him to try to save himself. There was a fascinating interview on MSNBC last night with 4 of the unlikeliest characters. It was Jerome Corsi, Nussbaum, the guy that was the assistant to Roger, Michael Caputo, and Carter Page. Interestingly, Carter Page had never met any of the other three men that were there on the panel. That interview was the first time that they had ever met. But each one of them gave an account of their own interview or series of interviews with the Mueller team. And they all said exactly the same thing, that every single question centered around Roger Stone. And so one thing that Jerome Corsi said, and he and Roger, I guess, were friends until yesterday or the day before yesterday, was that Roger had not left his house all week because he knew that the hammer was going to fall, and he was just waiting for the FBI to knock on the door. He, I think, didn't expect them to knock on the door at 6 o'clock in the morning in full battle gear. But that's what happened. And I think for him, there's really no way out unless he flips on the president. And I think that's unlikely. It's not in his nature. I think he's going to go to prison, not for a terribly long time and not to a real prison. He'll probably end up in a minimum security work camp. But he opened his mouth one too many times, and he's going to go to prison for it.
Well, what could he flip on the president about? I mean, if he got tipped off in advance that these emails were coming, that's not a crime, as far as I know. And the only crime is stealing the documents, and whether there was a conspiracy or collusion to steal the documents. That's nowhere to be found in this or any of the other indictments.
And he wouldn't know that anyway if that had been the case. So I think there's nothing for him to flip over, especially because he's really not been involved in this case. He inserted himself in it. There was no real role for him, so he has no inside information to give to the Mueller team in exchange for leniency.
Can you give us some insight from your own experience about how prosecutors can be extremely dishonest and deceptive to mislead the public?
Oh boy, there are literally no rules for prosecutors or for federal investigators. They can lie, they can deceive, they can cheat, they can do anything they want. And one thing that I kick myself for not reminding myself when it was happening to me is they always know the answer to the question before they ask it. And so where many of us get wrapped up is by trying to please them, trying to rack your brain to give them an honest answer, and then you end up misspeaking. That misspeaking can be used against you, of course, as a felony, making a false statement charge, or in some cases, an obstruction of justice charge. So what you ought to do in order to save yourself is, number one, and I tell this to everybody who will listen, do not talk to the feds, okay? Number two is just say, I don't recall. That's it. That's a legitimate response. I do not recall. When I had been arrested, I was charged, in addition to other things, with one count of making a false statement. I hadn't made any false statement, and of course that charge was dropped. But the prosecutors threatened me with another false statements charge and an obstruction of justice charge because I kept saying I don't recall. The honest to God's truth was that I didn't recall. And they were furious that I didn't give them an answer that they could then use against me. Well, that's one of the tricks that they have. That's the leverage that they have over you, because once you make that mistake, they immediately file a felony charge, and then they offer later on to trade it. Well, we'll drop these charges if you talk about so-and-so, or we'll drop all these other charges if you take a plea to a reduced charge. And that way they get a conviction, and that way they get a promotion, and they get a $400 performance award, and then they get to put your name on the ticker at the bottom of their website, and they all congratulate themselves. That's the system, the corrupt system that we have.
We've seen it on display again today. Please jump in, anybody who'd like to comment more on what anything's been said. Did I hear someone try to speak?
Yeah,
Ray?
hey, Joe.
Yeah, Ray.
Yeah, I'd just like to say hi to Craig Murray, my old friend. I don't see him regularly anymore. I don't get to London, but hi, Craig. And John, of course, I see more frequently. I'd just like to say a word in behalf of CNN. there was no fake news in the early part of their reporting. They reported, knock on the door, open the door. Next sentence, he opened the door. They got it right. No false news. They reported that accurately. The rest of it is crazy, okay? But let's give credit where it's due. That part was right. The end of my
okay. Well, thank you. I'm really glad that you are supporting the...
Yeah, we have to be fair and balanced here.
Very rare that you support mainstream media, but you're absolutely correct. That was a true statement. The FBI knocked on the door, said, open the door, and he opened the door.
Yep.
And what he's opened the door to was another bogus indictment. Isn't that right? One where he's charged with one count of obstruction of an official proceeding, not of justice, of an official proceeding. I don't have any idea. I don't actually have ever seen that charge before. I have no idea what kind of penalty it might.
Apparently, he didn't give one document to Mueller's team that they thought he should have handed over. When they said, give us all documents related to X. Apparently, there was one document that they knew he had, but he didn't hand over. So that one we don't know what it is, but one doc. Right? And he must have handed over about 4,000 emails and text messages and whatever else he handed over, and apparently he missed one.
And he forgot one or lost it or whatever.
Well,
that's
whatever.
That's a criminal charge against him now.
Yeah, and the reason they probably know that is because the NSA have got a record of all of his emails, and he didn't give them one of them that the NSA got in their database.
Exactly. They knew what he had, and he missed one. So now he's charged with this obstruction of an official proceeding.
Well, now he's charged with 5 misstatements and he's lying to Congress, and we don't know what he's supposed to lie about. But it's like John said. I mean, you can't remember exactly what exactly happened 2 years ago. So I mean, Roger Stone is denying that he deliberately lied. So if he said, well, on Tuesday I did X, Y, and Z, but it was actually Wednesday when the Mueller is going to charge him with lying because it was Wednesday and not Tuesday. So, I mean, that's this level that they're down to, isn't it? I mean, that's what they got. I mean, they did the same thing to Flynn, didn't they? They've got recordings of his telephone conversations with the Russian ambassador, and then apparently he denied something that he talked about, which he did talk about, and they already had the NSA recording, so they knew that he was lying. So they know all about this. But I mean, nobody in their right minds would take this stuff seriously, would they? I mean, yes, he's trying. I mean, what John said about Roger Stone, from what I've seen, is right, that he wants to be the centre of attention for everything. So he's inflated his role in all this, made all stuff up about how he had contacts with WikiLeaks when he didn't, and WikiLeaks. We never spoke to Roger Stone. Stop lying about you talking to us. We never talked to you. Right? And he was trying to go through Andy Credico, wasn't he, to make himself look bigger and more important.
Well, Roger Stone must be very happy today, Ian, because he's the center of attention. Let's hear from Ray.
No, I'd like to. I need to go, but first I wanted to ask Craig, who's in London, how Julian is doing, what kind of access he has to the outside world, or vice versa, and what he can tell us about Julian's condition.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't actually give you very much information, Ray. I seem to be one of the people they're not keen to be allowed to go and see Julian, by which I mean the Ecuador embassy, who are controlling very closely now who's allowed to see him. And it's very few people other than his legal team who are getting in. And really, the situation has changed completely, with the Ecuador government having reversed itself to become part of the current attempt to back a coup in Venezuela. And at this moment, I believe there are CIA or FBI, I'm not sure which, agents in Quito taking statements from diplomats who were in the Ecuadorian embassy over the last few years, trying to take statements against Julian Assange. So the Ecuadorian government is, if you like, switched sides, let's put it that way, and I believe I mean, one very important development was a couple of months ago, the Guardian newspaper and Luke Harding, who's a kind of outlet for the security services, he published, or he claimed to have seen Ecuadorian government documents appointing Julian to the Ecuadorian embassy in Moscow as a diplomat. Now then, there's been some discussion as to whether Luke Harding saw forgeries or whether he saw anything at all, or what it was that the Guardian reported. I fear it's very likely that these were fake documents, but fake documents created by the government of Ecuador. So they were, if you like, created months later, post-dated to December, but actually created on the proper official paper and with the proper official stamps. Because I think what worries me is I think the current government of Ecuador is very likely implicated in creating false narratives and false documentation to back those narratives in order to, again, try to build up the WikiLeaks Russia leak at the behest of the security services. In effect.
This sounds very much like yellow cake uranium in Niger. Maybe the same people are helping to compose these forgeries.
Yeah, that's perfectly possible, and it is a rather similar story. But no, in terms of Julian's, I haven't had access to Julian for a year, and obviously I'm very, very worried about him. And those who have access to him report he's in deteriorating health, and certainly the last couple of times I did see him, it's not quite a year, it's more like 9 or 10 months since I last saw him, but the last couple of times I did see him was really the first time I'd been seriously worried about his health. I'd never really before that seen much evidence of actual deterioration, but I did think the last time I saw him, I was worried about him. I was very, very worried about him, and obviously that worry only gets worse because he was already in very poor conditions, and my understanding is his conditions are now much worse than they were before, and the area in which he's allowed to move around within the Ecuadorian embassy is constrained down to his room. You may recall he was quite freely allowed use of the conference room where we met him together, and people, all that kind of ability to roam a little bit around the quite small embassy anyway, is, I understand, narrowing down further and further to a point where he's effectively confined in a single room all the time.
Well, unless John wants to butt in here, I'd like to just point out that Julian's lawyers filed a petition this week with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to rule in favor of Assange, a precautionary measure to get the Ecuadorian government to end his isolation, and also to have the U.S. unseal the indictment. I talked a bit about this in my introduction. That doesn't appear that this commission has legally binding rights, but it would be politically embarrassing if they decided in Assange's favor. There was another interesting bit in the 1,172-page petition that the lawyers filed with this commission of the which is an autonomous body of the OAS, American Organization of American States. They say in there, quote, that that this petition reveals, quote, for the first time that U.S. federal prosecutors have in the last few months formally approached people in the U.S., Germany, and Iceland and pressed them to testify against Mr. Assange. In return for immunity from prosecution, those approached are associated with WikiLeaks joint publications with other media about U.S. diplomacy at Guantanamo Bay and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is quite interesting. It looks like the U.S. now is trying to go around and get people to testify against Assange. And these people are at apparently major newspapers that partnered with WikiLeaks when it suited them. It doesn't suit them now. They've turned enemy. They've turned against Assange after the 2016 election. But this seems to indicate that perhaps reporters, editors from The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New York Times, just to name three of the many newspapers around the world that partnered with with WikiLeaks, that they're trying to get them to somehow testify against Assange in exchange for some immunity. Because under the Espionage Act, certainly anyone can be, even a non-American citizen can be indicted for merely possessing classified information and, of course, disseminating it. So I wonder if anybody wants, Craig or John or Ian, want to jump in and give us your thoughts on this. Not all at once, please.
Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Craig, what does this tell us about what the U.S. is up to now?
I don't know. I should say I'm personally very insulted that I never get charged. Everyone else does. It seems.
Or have you been questioned?
It's a dreadful omission. I really don't understand it at all. I mean, it seems to me it's a bit of a paper tiger, because I think if the extradition of Julian did go ahead under the Espionage Act, I think it would be extremely difficult in the United States to actually get a conviction under the Espionage Act against basically a journalist and a publisher, which is what Julian is. And we've even seen some signs of, the New York Times and the Washington Post. I know they've turned anti-WikiLeaks, but they're really going to have dilemmas in arguing that a media outlet or anyone should be jailed for publishing classified information leaked to them, because there are just obvious knock-on effects for them of that kind of judgment. And I think for someone like Alan Rusbridge, the former editor of The Guardian, to be charged under the Espionage Act, it's a paper tiger, isn't it? It's not really going to actually happen. So you can offer mainstream media journalists immunity. You don't really have to. I mean, by and large, you don't have to threaten the mainstream media journalists. They can see which side their bed is buttered, and pretty well all of the mainstream media has quite happily jumped into the attack on WikiLeaks. And my guess is that a large majority of them would very happily give evidence against Assange if asked, without needing to be threatened. So, but they couldn't really actually charge mainstream media outlets in Europe under the Espionage Act. That's just not really ever going to fly.
Right. Well, WikiLeaks in their petition does bring up that possibility that those other media organizations could also face similar charges. This is what the Obama administration called their New York Times problem, because they tried to prosecute Assange, and they got together, Holder, his attorney general, and they came to the conclusion that if they prosecuted Assange, even though they legally can under this abominable Espionage Act, that it would have the knock-on effect of then opening up the Times and the Post and all the major media to being charged as well, because they also publish classified information on a regular basis. What's troubling is that the Trump administration has had this maniacal feud with the media, and a lot of their criticisms may be valid. But if there's ever been an administration, and the Nixon administration didn't do this when they could have, against the paper, the New York Times and the Washington Post, when they published the classified information afterward, they were not allowed to exercise prior restraint, but they could have been prosecuted afterward, and they weren't. So if any administration would do it, it could be the Trump administration. And that's why I don't know if I fully understand or agree when you said that it would be hard to get a conviction. Why do you think that? If he winds up, you just mean under the Espionage Act, they can convict him on some other charges. Is that what you were saying, Craig?
No, I just think that freedom of speech protections in the States are pretty strong, and that you can't accuse him of leaking the material. He's not the leaker. He's just a publisher. It's very hard to believe. I think the legal case would be a landmark one, and I find it very, very hard. I think exactly as you say. I mean, it's just what you said. Is the fact that if you're going to convict WikiLeaks, you have to convict the Washington Post and the New York Times every time they publish classified information. I just can't see the United States courts wanting to go down that route.
Well, there would be a great test that could maybe wind up in a higher court about what takes precedent, the First Amendment or the Espionage Act, because
they try and make it more specific, like charging for endangering national security for the Vault 7 leaks or something like that. Make it specific that the other major media haven't done. So Washington Post didn't publish the Vault 7 stuff. That was WikiLeaks, wasn't it? So could they make a case that there was somehow something endangered national security? They always say that for that. And it's always a lie, but to make it something specific that WikiLeaks did. I mean, it's journalism. We all agree that it's journalism, and you can't prosecute under the Espionage Act for doing journalism. Otherwise, the whole free press goes out the window, doesn't it? And your free society goes out the window, and your Nazi Germany or Stalin's Russia, aren't you? If you don't have a free press, if journalists cannot publish leaked government secrets about misdeeds that the government is doing, then you're in a totalitarian state. You're not in a free society anymore, are you?
Well, we seem to be heading in that direction. Craig, you have never been questioned by any investigators from Mueller's team. Is that correct?
No, that's correct. They've not been in touch with me at all.
Why do you think that is? And why should they?
Well, I could certainly tell them, I'd be very happy to tell them that the leaks of the DNC and Podesta material from my own close contacts with WikiLeaks don't involve Russia and don't involve any state actor. I'd be happy to be able to give them an assurance on that. But of course, that's not what they want to hear. I presume that they haven't been in touch with me because they know what I will tell them is the opposite of what they want to hear. So I'm not anticipating hearing from them at all. I was very amused today by Twitter and a feed from Louise Mensch or Louise Bagshaw, who has settled down in the States, former Conservative politician here, and who has a remarkable 250,000 Twitter followers and has made herself a sort of internet focus of the anti-Russia movement, who today was tweeting around saying that I was the next in line to be charged and that I'm going to be the most famous man in the world. I think I really ought to hire her as my publicist. But no, I should be very, very happy to give evidence, but I think there's zero chance they will ask me to do so.
Well, speaking of fabulists, she's certainly one, and she's been a good PR person for herself, despite the nonsense she spewed. But Craig, could you prove that negative, that it was not any state actor involved?
Not really. I mean, the difficulty with WikiLeaks is, of course, that their whole organization is built around source protection. And so you can't prove a negative unless you say what the source actually is. You can say WikiLeaks know the source, know the source is not a state actor, and you can swear to that. But that's only going to actually be accepted if you then give up the actual source, and that, of course, would never be done.
Well, stop me if I'm wrong or you don't want to talk about this, but there was stories some time ago that you had some contact with someone involved in the leak.
Yes, I had. Let me say no more than you just said. I had contact with someone involved in the leak.
Okay. They would probably be asking you to say a lot more if they were interested in speaking with you. And as we now know, they are not interested because you would muddy up things for them, as you said.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, when on that occasion when I was in Washington, in the first place, they refused me the standard ESTA entry clearance, so I had to go through a visa application process. And I only managed to get my visa in time to get to Washington for the Sam Adams event that all this took place around. because, in fact, Jeremy Corbyn phoned the American ambassador on my behalf. So they knew damn well I was coming, were very interested in me being there. And then when I was there, I was with John, I was with Ray McGovern, I was with a host, Larry Wilkerson, I was with a host of other people who are of interest to them. And that was the occasion when we gave the award to John. So I think it is absolutely impossible that I was not followed and bugged the entire time I was there. So they know precisely what I was doing at all times. As we were saying already, they actually know the answers. They actually know the answers. It's just information they don't want to have as part of the official record.
And I didn't know that a UK citizen needed a visa to visit the US.
No, you don't. That's like you merely have to give advance information you're coming. But you can be refused. And I was given advanced information. I was given my ESTA clearance, which is the advanced information system, was refused. So I then had to apply for a visa.
And you got it, and you went, and that's all you could tell us about that. John, do you have any input on this, please?
Sorry, had to unmute myself.
Always wise thing to do.
Yeah. What to say? Actually, I will tell you something on a personal level. I went to the UK last week, and the reason why that's newsworthy is that I'm actually banned from the UK until the year 2028 because I'm a dangerous national security felon. But it never occurred to me until recently to use my Greek passport. And so the only thing that they asked me at immigration is how long I was staying, and they told me to enjoy my stay in the UK. So made it through. I'd like to talk for a second, though, Joe, about charges that Julian may be facing. I think the conventional wisdom is probably right that the Justice Department is charging him with espionage or espionage-related crimes. In any other district in America, this would be ludicrous. It would be outrageous. And I'll tell you why. I was desperate to not go to prison after my arrest. And so I hired O.J. Simpson's jury consultant. He happened to be my best friend's wife's uncle. So he did it for nothing. He came up to D.C. We went to the trouble of getting him a security clearance so that he could review my case. And he got it very quickly and went through 15,000 pages of discovery and then said to me, if we were in any other district in America, I'd say we win this thing. It's easy. Hands down, we win it. But the Eastern District of Virginia, you don't have a prayer. Your jury is going to be made up of people from the CIA, the FBI, the Defense Department, Homeland Security, and intelligence community contractors. He said, you just don't have a prayer. Take a plea. That's why they charged Julian in the Eastern District of Virginia. No crime was committed in the Eastern District of Virginia or anywhere else for that matter. But they charged him there because they knew that the deck was stacked. And in any other district in America, people would see the truth, that the man's a journalist. He was simply disseminating information in the public good, and should not be prosecuted for that. That's the exercise of freedom of speech. But that's not how it's going to play out. Now, there are certainly more minor charges that could have been levied against him that he may have been able to, or may still be able to negotiate, where you could maybe negotiate it down to a misdemeanor count of, let's say, failure to secure classified information, which is what General Petraeus got. But my real fear is they're not interested in a deal. They're interested only in coming down on him like a ton of bricks, and that's why it's in EDVA.
That's very troubling. In your case, did they invoke state secret privilege? I'm asking because this could also happen with Stone, maybe, if they try to challenge.
Absolutely, they did. In the very first hearing, they did. It's called an invocation of the SIPA Act, the Classified Information Protection Act. And so that meant several different things. It meant that that no one was allowed inside the courtroom unless they were cleared. So it was my attorneys and me, the prosecutors, the judge, the bailiff, and one clerk who took the classified transcript. And that was it. The door was physically locked, so nobody could come in. And then when they would declare it a SIPA hearing and throw everybody out and lock the door, they would then sweep the whole courtroom for bugs. And it was only then that we could begin talking. Now, they overdid that because there really was no relevant classified information in my case. And that was my argument from the beginning, was that it was all unclassified. Or if it was classified, it was improperly classified. And again, I fear they're going to do the same thing with Julian. Just say everything is classified, everything is a secret, it's all national security, when in fact it's not. Not at all.
You and your defense were allowed to remain present for that hearing? I thought that they kicked everybody out. Like in the Sibel Edmonds case, I think in Sibel Edmonds' case, she and her lawyers weren't even allowed to be there. Is that right?
That happened to me once, where we had asked for 70 documents to be declassified. So we had filed 70 separate motions. And I needed these 70 documents to defend myself. And so as soon as we went in, the prosecutors invoked SIPA, and then they asked for, it was called a Part C hearing or Part D hearing, something like that. I had never heard of it. And as soon as they said, request a Part D hearing, my lawyers jumped up simultaneously and said, objection. And I said, what's going on? And they told me, hold on a second, this is important. And so, so the judge said that she'll hear the prosecution in camera. And my lawyers objected again and then said, at least let us come in without our client. And she said no, that it was in camera. So she goes into her chambers with only the prosecutors, and then she comes back out and she says, I'm going to save everybody a lot of time, and I'm going to reject all 70 of these motions. So I never had any idea why I was being denied the ability to defend myself. Whatever the decision was, it was classified, and neither my attorneys nor I had the right to know. And so here we are. That was 7 years ago, and I still don't know why my motions were denied. Julian's going to go through the same thing.
Yes, that's what I was thinking, that he's going to go through the same thing. We're trying to bring in your partner, Brian Becker, John, but I don't see him up on the screen yet. Let's see if we can bring him in, because Brian has only half an hour, and I wanted to get his take on the Stone indictment and on this petition that Assange's lawyers have filed with the Inter-American Court for Human Rights. Brian Becker, welcome to the Vigil. Are you unmuted? You're not. Please unmute, please. Unmute your microphone by going down and there you go. Hello,
Hi,
Brian.
And I was just saying to John, it's been a long time.
Oh, you know John, do you? Oh, I see. Yeah, you've met before.
It's been literally minutes since we've seen each other.
Yeah, of course, Brian Becker is the host with John Kiriakou of Loud and Clear. Yeah. Maybe the best show on radio anywhere. And I don't just say that because I'm a frequent guest, but it's a great show. So, Brian, can you weigh in on anything you want? But we've been talking about the Stone indictment, obviously, and the petition by WikiLeaks to the Inter-American Court to unseal this indictment that Leonie Brinkema has her hands on, the same judge John was just referring to, I believe, and also to end his isolation. So, Brian, welcome again.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. Great honor to be here. Well, just regarding the Roger Stone indictment, we talked about it today. I mean, I have to say that this is so much ado about nothing, it would seem. 7 felonies for concealing the fact that he did not tell the full truth, the whole truth, about the fact that he sent emails and text messages when he spoke before the House Intelligence Committee. Again, when you read the indictment, it's stunning for its paucity, for the absence of any indication of collusion with Russia. It is about WikiLeaks and about organization number 1, and Roger Stone seems to be somebody who is dying to show that he is in fact relevant to the Trump campaign. And as he says, and as is quoted in the indictment, they won't return my calls. So here you have Roger Stone clamoring to be relevant, senior people in the Trump campaign seemingly indicating that they don't care. And the second part of the indictment, in addition to concealing that he in fact did send texts and emails that show nothing, in fact, he's indicted for witness tampering, which I think is threatening person number 2, and Randy Credico, and sort of suggesting that he's going to kill Randy's dog. Anyway, when you look at MSNBC or CNN, or you think like this is again proof positive, the smoking gun at last. We know that there was in fact collusion, but it's so empty. Who knows? Maybe this will become a non-story or a secondary story in the next day or two. It seemed to be of greater interest to the media than the illegal efforts by the Trump administration to tell the people of Venezuela who their president is. It certainly has been more dominant in the news. And, I think when we go back and think about Julian being in the Ecuadorian embassy and the rollback of progressive governments in Ecuador and throughout Latin America, and Trump trying to do the same once again in Venezuela, we see what's at stake. The people who have defied empire, who have said no to the empire, who have tried to stand for self-determination, like the former Ecuadorian government, they become a target. And part of their crime is to give safe haven to Julian. It shows how we're all interconnected, and what happens in Latin America impacts the struggle for press freedom, for the freedom to speak. Certainly in the case of Julian, it has profound implications. So I think the Stone indictment is going to be like one more set of seemingly confirming headlines about the Russia narrative and WikiLeaks' role in it, even though when you read the indictment, and we've read it several times today because John and I did cover it, there's really truly nothing there.
Once again, but it looks like quantity instead of quality. Just pile on these indictments, have the media, sycophantic media, report it as if, yes, it's a smoking gun, to leave the impression with the public that that's what it is. And the mission accomplished. You may never have to go to a courtroom. And even if it does, Stone may be faced with the secret state secret's privilege, as John was just talking about. And he was never charged. Again, the word collusion is not in this indictment. It speaks of interactions between Stone and WikiLeaks, as if interactions are a crime. And even if he was tipped off in advance that these emails were coming, I don't see how that's in any way a criminal matter. I want to bring in Peter B. Collins. Speaking of radio hosts, Peter B. Collins is speaking to us from the Bay Area. He's one of the best known radio personalities in that area. And I think it's his first time joining us on the Vigil. And I really welcome him here. And Peter, I'd love you to weigh in on give us your take on the Stone indictment. You've done enormously good work about Russiagate on your podcast. So please give us your take, and welcome.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm delighted to join you and the other people here today. Shout out to John Kiriakou. Always good to see you, and pleased to hear Ambassador Murray's comments before I came on. I had the benefit of doing a podcast interview today that was scheduled before we knew about the Stone indictments with Aaron Mate, and he has really surfaced as a great skeptic and a very rational critic of the Russiagate narrative. And one of the things we did in the podcast was review the indictment, which is just process crimes, and then the coverage in the New York Times. And let me just quote from the first paragraph of the story here. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, revealed Friday the most direct link yet between the Trump campaigns and WikiLeaks' parallel efforts to use Democratic material stolen by Russians to damage the election campaign of Hillary Clinton. Now, the yellow journalism and the media malpractice just in the opening graph is quite priceless. So first of all, by trumpeting that this is the most direct link yet, we may clearly deduce that all of the other links that have been bandied about and presented to us as the conclusive link of collusion were bullshit. Because this is the most direct link. And you will recall that the most recent blunder by the New York Times, when it falsely reported that Manafort had ordered his pal Konstantin Kilimnik to share mostly public Trump polling information with the first false report was with Russian oligarchs and Deripaska in particular. And that was corrected to say, whoops, it was Ukrainian figures who, excuse me, my dog is getting hectic. Go get him, Chloe. It was Ukrainian figures who Manafort wanted to see this information. And that was described as the strongest link to date of Russian collusion. And so the corporate media keeps tripping over itself as it tries to declare that the latest, stunning revelation is the conclusive one. And when you read carefully into the article, the lawyers require an offsetting caveat. The indictment does not mention whether Stone or any other Trump associate knew about the Russian operatives' plans before they hacked the Democrats. Again, that's unproven. It's asserted. To make a case that Mr. Trump's associates conspired with the Russians, the investigators indicated they needed to show that the associates knew about the hacks in advance. Knowing about the fruits of what Russia stole was not enough. So, the article itself undermines the headline and the claims that will feed social media, the people who never click through to actually read the article, who don't read an article critically. And so this, once again, is piled high and deep, but it is not substantive.
There's a list that someone put out of 50 mistakes that have been made, serious errors, unsubstantiated stories about Russiagate. And we could probably, again, this is the same pattern, Peter, you've just shown. Big headline, big lead, can't back it up. This is journalism 101. Story should be totally rewritten to reflect that all the indictment says is that there were interactions between WikiLeaks and Stone, and WikiLeaks is denying that as well. So I don't know if that's I didn't read the New York Times story yet. I mean, where did you just piling on? You're just piling on. Where does this leave us, Peter, in terms of how the public is viewing this story?
Well, number one, it panders to the bias of people who think that Hillary should have won. Ray McGovern likes to refer to it as HW, Hillary would have won. And they're not going to be moved by any rational reporting or rational argument. But the biggest damage, I feel, is that it feeds Trump's attacks on the media. It makes his fake news claims at least partly true. And if, which is highly possible, Mueller never proves the kind of collusion that was originally alleged, then the media will be discredited, at least in the minds of 40, 50% of the American public, for a long time going forward. And so this can, I think, perpetrate serious damage and allow a demagogue like Trump to surface in the future and ride a similar wave of attacking the media.
Brian, you want to weigh in on that? Do you think if collusion is never proven, which seems likely, that would somehow seriously damage the credibility of the media, even further than it's been damaged already?
I understand Peter's point, and I think with some part of the population, it will be the point of reference to make the argument that you should never believe the mainstream media. And of course, that would be basically true. For some part of the population, what happened in Iraq, say with the media sort of echoing the Cheney, Bush, Rumsfeld propaganda machine, that became the point of reference, like, don't believe the media because they lied, and the lie was big enough, and the catastrophic impact from that war was so great that it should always be remembered. But when I think about these things, it just reminds me that at any given moment, the dominant ideas in society, which are sort of propagated by the opinion molders, and those opinion molders are those who are basically functioning as servants of established power, that they're able to generate some pretextual basis to galvanize public opinion at a particular moment. And so the skepticism, the well-earned skepticism of the media for the larger population dissipates at the moment of crisis, at the moment of war and peace, for instance, or, you know, some sensationalized assault. And that's what I fear, is that, yes, it will be for a part of the population, and certainly for a part of Trump supporters who will think you can never, ever believe anything that the mainstream media presents. And thus, if Trump or somebody like Trump or somebody, as Peter is mentioning, some demagogue of a, you know, purely fascistic character comes along, some part of the population will say, well, of course they're being exposed by the mainstream media about who should believe them. But I think the bigger danger is the sort of omniscience and the power of the corporate media to continue to shape and mold opinion. And if we go back through the centuries, even before there was a mainstream daily media, even when, say, in the times of medieval Europe, the church and its propagandists were able to sort of shape the narrative and divert opinion when anger was getting great. They could blame the Jews or, you know, find some way to direct the population until the population sort of learns through its own experience that they're being misled, and then possibly the narrative gets pushed back. I think the difference between today and yesteryear, and when I talk about yesteryear, I'm talking about even 20 years ago, not the 15th century, is that we do have the tools of fighting back against the dominant narrative that didn't exist in the past. The fact that we do have the capacity to have this kind of online vigil, the fact that we have the ability to sort of go against the grain and against the dominant narrative using new technologies. Yes, they're monitored. Yes, they're surveilled. Yes, they're limited. Yes, we're censored. But still, we have opportunities that didn't quite exist before. So I think that we should.
Brian, what they've been doing is they've been driving half the population totally insane. They're totally delusional over this. They've been fed this for nearly 3 years now, and nearly half the population is clinically insane over it. I'm not joking about this. You go on Reddit and stuff like that. The people are adamant that Trump is Putin's puppet and whatever. They're still putting this out. There's absolutely no evidence of any Trump collusion or Russian influence or anything. But these people have been watching CNN and Rachel Maddow on MSNBC every night for 2.5 years, and they're totally brainwashed. They are, in my opinion, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I would say these people are clinically insane because they are so deluded.
Well, you're not a psychiatrist. You're a robot, Ian. You're not. Yes, Brian.
You're right. I mean, it is. Well, you know what? It's insanity. It's also, it has a lot in common with religion. It's sort of an article of faith. Russia colluded. Trump is the president because of Russia. Putin has this power. We don't actually need facts because we believe. You know, it's an article of faith. It's the new sort of unofficial religion of America. And America's had other unofficial religions, like during the Cold War, the last witch hunt, where, you know, if you were associated with anything, like you wanted to ban the bomb and you signed a petition and some socialists signed it too, you might be tarred and feathered, at least sort of figuratively. Yeah, I think it is a kind of insanity, you know, one that's been carefully cultivated. But the thing that I'm really curious about, and the thing that I don't know, is it seems to me that it's impacted a certain, and I would say a fairly narrow layer of the population. And those are the people who are traditionally consider themselves kind of Democratic Party activists or liberals, the people we would traditionally sort of think, oh, they're the ones who are going to come to our anti-war demonstrations. But then there is this big part of the population who I think doesn't believe this, or certainly doesn't care about it because it doesn't impact their lives. And somehow our progressive movement has to find a way to speak to those people, some of whom voted for Trump, some of whom supported Hillary Clinton, many of them were Bernie supporters, many of them just don't vote, but they're disorganized but discontented at the same time. And I don't think this dominant narrative is reaching them that much.
It's another way of splitting America right down the middle, okay? Because you've got the people who watch MSNBC and CNN and read the New York Times and whatever, right? And they all believe all this ridiculous Russiagate nonsense and whatever, and the rest of the population don't. But that's the way they've been controlled people for decades. Half the people are religious, half the people aren't. Right? Half the people support abortion, half of them don't. Half of them support gun rights and half of them want guns banned. It's another way of dividing America pretty much straight down the middle, isn't it? So if you're a Democrat voter, you're going to believe it, right? And you're going to be watching Rachel Maddow spew total nonsense every night on MSNBC. Well, and then the Republicans will be watching Fox, won't they? And about Fox, I know it's a complete load of rubbish. So
you could actually call those broadcast sermons in keeping with Brian's.
It is a sermon, and
going back to have reconfirmed their faith.
Yeah,
to have their faith reconfirmed.
Yeah,
and then when that faith is as solid as it is, then Mueller could drop in this very thin indictment, and it just shows it's something more important than it is. But there's one thing that exists today too, Brian, that didn't exist in the 15th century or 20 years ago, and that's the news cycle that changes so rapidly that within 3 days, like the BuzzFeed story that apparently was false because the Mueller team made a statement, a rare statement, saying it was not accurate to say that Trump's lawyer was told to lie to Congress to perjure himself. Well, BuzzFeed is standing by that story, and I think one reason they might be, I don't know, but their strategy might be that within 3 days that story will be forgotten because now we've got the Mueller indictment. So when it becomes clear, if it ever does, that there is no collusion in the conclusion of Mueller's final report, in 3 days it'll be gone. I just think they'll just ignore it. They're never going to acknowledge they were wrong about this. Yes, Peter.
Well, I feel that the most insidious effect here is the way Russiagate has turned anti-war Democrats who were opposed to Bush's wars, who kind of went silent on Obama's drone wars because he wasn't putting massive numbers of so-called boots on the ground, and who are now moving into a much more hawkish direction. And Kevin Gosztola did a great job at Shadowproof today, listing all of the Democrats who are supporting the coup in Venezuela. And they haven't learned from our regime change blunders. And they are willing to go along with Trump because Maduro is a socialist. And they look really no deeper than that. And they're leading a lot of Democratic sheep with them who will support a military intervention in Venezuela. who can be led to support an attack on Israel that the United States would conduct on behalf of the state of Israel. And so while, we can parse who believes the Russiagate story and who doesn't, how much will they believe the media in the future, the shift really pronounced. And ask Medea Benjamin at Code Pink. In 2008, they had 120 chapters across the United States. Today, they've got about a dozen. War is not seen as a bad thing by a lot of Americans. They've become accustomed to endless war, to undeclared war, to war that is funded by a Congress that will not approve or disapprove of it, or even provide any parameters on, what the mission is and, when it is a success or failure. And so this has been used in a very effective way to shift the thinking of millions of Americans as they're being told that Russia, brainwashed African Americans using Facebook, and that the same company, New Knowledge, that produced that report, did dirty tricks to get Doug Jones elected in Alabama using Russian information tactics. And so, for me, I started in the media when Nixon was in the White House, and Watergate was my early big story. And to see this come around in a different fashion at a different time, and to have a much more long-term insidious effect, well, I find it surprising, but also, pretty worrisome.
And as much as they hate Trump, the Democrats, they're supporting him on Venezuela, you're telling us. Isn't that curious, Peter?
Yeah. I mean, Dick Durbin rationalizes it. He's the number 2 guy in the Senate. Gostola found that Bernie Sanders, Tulsi Gabbard, and Ro Khanna, the progressive congressman from Silicon Valley, are the only ones who have spoken up and explicitly disagree with the recognition of this rogue guy who announced that he's now the legitimate president of Venezuela.
Yes. Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to have to jump off because we're actually organizing. We're organizing protests. We in the Answer Coalition are organizing protests with Code Pink and others on Venezuela. Today, we did it yesterday, the day before, and we're doing it again tomorrow morning in front of the White House. So I'm actually about to go into meeting, so I have to jump off. But what I want to say is that the last point that Peter made is like super important. The Democrats will, in fact, start to support Trump if he succeeds at toppling the sovereign government of Venezuela, a government that won the election. They won the election because the ultra-right, which is Guaido's party, Leopoldo Lopez's party, the far right wouldn't participate, and the moderate right lost. And that's why Maduro won. And now Trump illegally, with the height of imperial arrogance, saying, I've picked a new president. I have a new president for you, Venezuela, and you, Maduro, don't have the right to close the American embassy or expel our diplomats because you're no longer the president. We've determined that you are no longer the president. I mean, the height of imperial arrogance is it's so brazen, it's beyond anything. Like even with Chile or Guatemala in 54 or Iran in 53, they at least hid a little bit. It was a covert operation. There's nothing covert here. And if Trump were to succeed, the Democratic criticism of Trump will be muted. They will start to applaud Trump. He did what Obama only sort of threatened to do when he declared Venezuela a national security threat. And just like the Democrats applauded Trump and said he was acting presidential when he dropped 59 cruise missiles on Syria, that could well be Trump's way of extricating himself from this barrage of domestic criticism, is be successful at some imperialist adventure like in the one in Venezuela. Hopefully,
but this is so obvious. Everybody in Venezuela knows what is going on. And Maduro, whatever you think of his government, he's got a lot of supporters in Venezuela. And if they really try and carry out this coup, there's a huge danger of a civil war breaking out. And that Trump, it'd be like Nicaragua with the Contras. They'll be arming the people they're supporting, these really right-wing groups. They'll be arming them against the Venezuelan army, because the Venezuelan army has specifically said they're with Maduro. So Maduro's still got the army. Right, so how are they going to get rid of him? Well, there's got to be guerrilla tactics, haven't they, or something? They've got to do like the Nicaraguan Contras and arm them from Colombia, or hire Eric Prince type mercenaries to go and organise them, or something like that. It'd be a civil war. Right, and what will that do to South America? There'll be a huge refugee crisis. We're talking Syria now, aren't we? We're talking a replay of Syria. That there's a civil war, a huge refugee crisis, and loads of people getting killed.
Well, that's exactly what would help. As Brian is saying, that could very well help Trump, and he's not yielded to that temptation yet to engage the U.S. in a major military operation on the scale of Iraq, for example. But this could very well be because they have not taken the military option off the table. So if indeed there is a civil war, what side the U.S. will be on, and there could even be maybe American troops involved. So it's a very dangerous situation. Brian, I know you have to run. I thank you very much for joining us again today.
Thank you, Joe, for organizing it, and thanks, everybody. I wish I could be on longer, but next time. Thanks so much.
Hope to see you in front of the White House tomorrow morning. Okay, bye-bye.
But they're also pushing fake news on this Venezuela thing. The pictures they showed the other day from Wednesday of this huge rally in Caracas that had nothing to do with protesting against Maduro. It was the anniversary of a 1958 coup that deposed a military dictatorship. And apparently there's a big rally on this day every year. So the right-wing groups hijacked this day to infiltrate and say, we're going to have an anti-Maduro rally. But it wasn't anti-Maduro. It was commemorating a 1958 coup that restored democracy. Right, so it's like Americans celebrating the 4th of July. Okay? We have a parade. So
yes, go on.
Fake news, all fake news. And the other thing that's going on is the UK government's integrity initiative thing, which is UK government funded thing to plant fake stories in the mainstream media and push all these lies. Okay, it's all neocon stuff. It's all anti-WikiLeaks, anti-Assange stuff, anti-Russia stuff. Whatever the neocon agenda is, that's what they're pushing. But they've got a list of mainstream hacks, puppets that will push out any fake stories, right? And there's a list of them. It's all the anti-Russia people. But this is apparently they've got networks in lots of different countries. They got a network in America, and they got a network in Germany. They got a network in Spain, and all over the place. Right? And the UK government is funding Operation Mockingbird on steroids in it. Right?
Yes, it is indeed. I want to bring Peter B. Collins back in because he has to leave. Peter, do you have any final thoughts about anything we've discussed today?
Well, I just want to echo what Ian was just talking about, the integrity initiative, and we've only seen a tip of it so far, is quite insidious. And, we can at least raise questions at this stage about the heavily managed narrative offered of the alleged Skripal nerve agent poisoning in Salisbury last March. Because the documents that Max Blumenthal published, and you ran the story, Joe, at Consortium News, show that this guy, Simon Lacey, Bracy, whatever the guy, he's got a double name.
Bracy Lane.
Thank you. Bracy Lane. He popped up as a volunteer for Bernie Sanders in Iowa in 2016. And the Institute of Statecraft that runs the Integrity Initiative now lists him as a significant player And it cites his background of being on political campaigns in the United States and a specialist on Russian interference. And so we see the full circle here. And I want to close just with a really basic restatement of the facts. There is no evidence that Russia hacked the DNC and delivered any proceeds to WikiLeaks. And Ambassador Murray was on earlier, Craig Murray from Britain, clearly answering your questions, Joe, that the material was leaked and not hacked. So the fundamental premise for this whole episode is false. It is a narrative that was established most likely by screenwriters inside the intelligence community with help from eager people on the Clinton campaign and in her political camp. And we need to continue to focus. Many people have acknowledged that Julian Assange is not the most sympathetic person in the world. I think if I had been accused of rape or sexual assault based on relationships that at least began consensually, I might be as unattractive as some people see Julian Assange. But he is a figure for critical rights. And it is a right to the truth. It is a right to penetrate the false secrecy that has just, grown exponentially since 9/11. And to really try to end the dominance of the false narratives that are launched by government and amplified by the media. And so WikiLeaks has performed some very valuable functions over the last 10 years. And I think it's important to keep our focus on what that means to real journalism, to a free media that can report based on documents that have been leaked or otherwise acquired. And if we allow our government to stomp on Julian Assange, we will be next. And even if that doesn't happen, we are next. Because the arrival of NewsGuard, this new corporate truth police, the restrictions that Facebook and others have imposed on independent media content, the way they brag about how they use their algorithms to make sure that the work that you do, Joe, the work that I do, gets seen by as few people as possible. This cycle is clearly established. And, we're on the kind of front lines of it. And I hope that the people who are watching the Vigil today will recognize that they need to support Julian Assange if they want honest reporting and credible media in the future.
Absolutely, Peter. It's an historic press freedom case that will be discussed for decades afterward. And it's so chilling when you brought up about NewsGuard and Integrity Initiative. It sounds like a Cold War era program. Well, guess what? It is. We're in the second Cold War. So we're seeing the same kinds of things we saw in the 50s and 60s, et cetera. So, Peter, thank you very, very much for joining us again.
It's my pleasure. And please press on. And I thank all the people who participated and, most importantly, the people who are watching.
Thank you, Peter. So that was Peter B. Collins talking from the Bay Area as a radio personality and a defender of WikiLeaks, and we welcome and thank him for having joined us. I want to bring in our Australian correspondent, Kathy Vaughan, to bring in. We usually end our program with a report from Australia. Kathy, you've been listening, I think, the entire time. So could you please weigh in with some of your thoughts? And then we're going to play, as we end the program, a new piece of music dedicated to Julian Assange that Kathy has edited. But let's hear from Kathy first.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's a shame that it's with me, actually. We actually have Tony Kevin, a recorded interview, but we're going to play that next week. I've got a meeting just after with Tony Kevin to discuss some other business that we.
Please tell him we're holding it over for a week. Please tell him that we're holding his great interview over till next week.
Yes, I certainly will. So I just wanted to comment briefly on a few things that I've heard throughout the vigil. Firstly, that little gap in what Ray McGovern was explaining, because I was in last week and listened to William Binney's explanation, and I happened to be employed a lot of the time in a technical capacity. So what he was talking about is new evidence. And apparently the DNC data is out there now. They were looking at the Guccifer 2 copy of the leaks, the emails, I should say. And so what they have found in the metadata, and it's a very simple concept. When you format a hard drive or a USB stick, you've got to choose a format. So one that might be compatible with an Apple operating system or a PC. Now there's one cross-platform way to format a drive, and that's called FAT32. So that means you can read it equally well on both Mac and PC. So in the metadata, there are traces of the FAT32 formatting of the device, which is even more solid evidence that the hack is BS. The other thing I'd like to talk about is just one line that really leapt out at me last night when I was, might be yesterday for you, when I was watching the CNN report. And that was even repeated a few times. You know, we've been missing this part of the story. You know, the WikiLeaks part, and they are so hopeful that Mueller is going to come up with all of the information that they have been missing about WikiLeaks, which is another admission that they really don't have anything at all. But something that I find even more disturbing, and this was vaguely mentioned earlier on as well, was by you, Joe, and that's what was going on in Ecuador, the interviewing of 6 Ecuadorian diplomats, and that's specifically about the visits, the imaginary visits of Paul Manafort. Now, the disturbing aspect about that is that really one of those 6 diplomats should have been Fidel Narváez, because he was the head of service. He was the consul at the embassy from 2012 to 2018. So if anybody knew whether Manafort was visiting Julian, it would have been Fidel. And in fact, Fidel has actually given an interview on The Real News where he has made it very clear that Manafort never visited at all. Now, curiously, he doesn't seem to be one of the 6 diplomats. In fact, the same day that was happening, Narváez was in London trying to get in to the Ecuadorian embassy. I wonder if he wanted to be part of that testimony, because I heard that part of it was happening, you know, through video link to London. But what happened was that Fidel was refused entry to his own embassy. Yes, that's so you know, this is like, well, it seems that, and then there's the other aspect as well of trying to fabricate evidence. I think we can't really think about the law too much in this, but specifically we have had the report that people involved in the news publications with co-publications with WikiLeaks have been approached specifically in the United States, Germany, and Iceland. And in fact, the person who's reporting about it happening in Iceland is Kristen Hrafsson. And I would, this has just come out, I would just like to read you very, very quickly what Kristen has said. So first of all, this is from the article. So in one article, it was reported that he was offered, Iceland authorities offered him immunity from prosecution in exchange for testifying against Julian Assange, according to a translated article. But then we have another translation of what Kristen said, which would indicate that it wasn't him directly. So the quote that I have here is, "I can confirm from the first hand that this has been done. No one has contacted me this way. However, I myself am investigating this issue, and I know that data has been downloaded to a private company with secrecy," says Kristen Hrafson in a
Who is the, by the way, who's the new editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So yes, it's been very explicit in Iceland. It looks like they're, going hell for leather to try and get, bribe people or persuade. We also know, just speaking about Venezuela, that from Rafael Correa, that this was part of the three-part deal. In fact, there was probably some other things as well, but specifically mentioned was debt relief, but also a US base being brought into Ecuador, the alienation of Venezuela, like just keep your nose out of it, and also, very sadly, Correa reports that his inside sources tell him that it was President Moreno who offered Julian Assange to sweeten the deal. So that was, quite a long time ago, and that was when Paul Manafort visited Moreno in Ecuador. So we've got all that. We've got the Integrity Initiative. We've got the Spanish cluster of the Integrity Initiative, who are apparently linked to providing documents for Luke Harding's first report about Julian's appointment at the Russian embassy. And then, we have the Manafort story, which the Guardian still haven't retracted, but perhaps this is why they have not retracted. They've not really defended either. It's been dead silence from Kate Viner, because possibly they knew that what was going to happen in terms of gathering evidence from embassy staff and journalists around the world, promising them immunity, but from what? I mean, it's really a veiled threat to even collaborators with WikiLeaks in the past.
Thank you, Kathy, for that. We're coming to the end of today's vigil, the 14th. And I want to ask Ian to say a few final words if he has, and I really appreciate he stayed with us the entire time. Ian is a real human being, as you can see in our video. Please.
That's like a wave and everything.
Yeah.
Special software.
Program to do.
Special software. I just say that Assange is still in a very, very dangerous position. Okay, it's not just the US government that wants him extradited and locked up and silenced. The UK government have got every reason to do it as well. The UK government has got just as many skeletons in the closet as the US government, arming terrorists in Syria and whatever else. And they certainly do not want Assange to speak out. I mean, he'd be talking about all sorts of things. If he wasn't silenced and gagged, he's silenced and gagged as part of his asylum rules, isn't he? But if he wasn't, he'd be talking about all sorts of things. He'd be talking about the Integrity Initiative, UK government propaganda against Russia and WikiLeaks, and he'd be talking about the Venezuela coup by Trump. I mean, this coup is just totally ridiculous. How any Democrat could support that in the US is just beyond reason. This is a coup, just like they've done coups all over South America and Latin America before. I mean, it's so blatant, and they're just going to make the situation worse. The only way Venezuela is going to sort itself out is by Venezuelans sorting it out. If the US goes in with basically jackboots and starts arming people to do a coup and overthrow a government, that's just going to make things worse. That's going to be a civil war. Julian Assange is a really powerful voice. Okay, he's got a load of followers amongst independent type people, the type of people that decide American elections, isn't it?
That's why he's being silenced.
Solid Dems, the people who support Assange, they're not solid Dems because they hate him now, don't they? And they're not the neocons that have got, are they? Because they hate him as well. All the neocons hate him. So the people that support Assange are the middle people, the independents or the moderate people. And moderate got, I don't think there's many moderate Dems about this because they've all been brainwashed. I mean, there's Bernie supporters and stuff, right, that support Assange, right, and people who support Tulsi Gabbard will also support Assange, right. So we've got the left wing out of the Democrat Party might support him, and then we've got all the people in the middle. But the people in the middle decide American elections. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter a jot what people who voted Democrat for the last 40 years think, does it? Because they're going to vote Democrat. And the people who voted GOP for the last 40 years, don't matter about them either, because they're going to vote GOP. It's the 20% of people in the middle, in the swing states, that decide American elections. And they're the people that are basically, and most of them, support Assange. Right? So, who do the deep state, the FBI and the CIA want to get elected? They want CIA agents, don't they? There's a record number of ex-CIA agents, ex-FBI ran for the Democrats in this election, don't they? And they all hate Assange, don't they? So they want to put those people into Congress.
Certainly they do, Ian. And you were absolutely right in saying that Julian Assange's voice is a powerful one, and that's why it's being silenced. Part of the protocols is that he cannot speak about politics publicly. And you would have to imagine that if Assange still had access to his Twitter account, he'd be commenting on the Venezuela situation right now. And that would have enormous influence. So that's why they're silencing him. Situations like this, they don't want his voice out there. That's why they're using all these other tactics that Peter and I just discussed to cut down on alternative media. They want to have carte blanche to do what they want without any criticism. And then the corporate media gives them that carte blanche. We've come now really to the end of the 14th Vigil. I wanted to thank everyone who took part in this, and that includes Kathy Vogan and Ian Schilling, who are still with us. And earlier we had John Kiriakou, Ray McGovern, Brian Becker, and Peter B. Collins. And I want to end first by pointing out that when we ended our vigil last Friday, we announced that there would be an important article to be published by Susie Dawson, who was really the founder and instrumental in creating these vigils. And Susie had worked very hard on a piece about how New Zealand works with the Five Eyes and really takes orders from the U.S. and even spied on third countries, including allied France. It was a piece we published and got a lot of response from in Consortium News last Friday night or Saturday. The problem with this is that Susie got a couple of responses as well, and they're not pleasant. And for example, she received quite soon afterward an email from an anonymous emailer that said, "There will be consequences. We have our eyes on you. Make your bed." And she received today another threat, again from an anonymous email. It says, "Do not forget what happened to Dr. King, Suzette. Before you think to drag Fort Meade again, you're ours, Mr. and Mrs. Winky." Fort Meade, of course, is the location of the National Security Agency here in the U.S. It doesn't mean that this came from someone there, but these are really ominous and horrible responses. It shows you the kind of threats that people who speak out in favor of Julian Assange or criticize the intelligence agencies face. And Susie reminded me that she's faced much worse than this. But nonetheless, this is a horrible thing. So what she's asking, Susie, is that people shut these threats up by reading the article on Consortium News and sharing it, because there's a lot to be learned in that. So we're going to end in the last 12 minutes now, or 11 minutes, with a new music video that our own Kathy Vogan here edited and put online in dedication to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. So when Kitty is ready, to roll that, we will do that. And I say goodbye to everyone. And please join us next Friday, again, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. for the 15th Vigil for Julian Assange. Thank you.